Welcome everybody to our meeting, which is called Territorial. Then we inserted a strange word, cooperation. So it's Territorial Cooperation Agenda 2030. And what we tried to bring together is two worlds which seem to have been quite a distance. The one world is the one of the Territorial Agenda, the world of spatial planners, regional developers, and the other one is the Interreg world. And I would say these two worlds sometimes meet, but not too often. And Philip, my colleague Philip, and I, let's say in the past year, we stumbled increasingly often over the fact that territory simply matters. So, and Interreg programs sometimes give the impression to be quite detached from territories, although, let's say, the initial name of the policy objective is European Territorial Cooperation. And that's where these two terms and worlds meet. So it's European Territorial Cooperation, and it's the Territorial Agenda. Philip, how long does it take you to walk around 1 square kilometer? It's difficult.
1 square.
Yeah, square.
Square. So,
1 kilometer.
So meaning I need to walk 4 kilometers in total. And isn't it so that one says if you walk fast, it's 6 kilometers per hour. So I guess it's somewhere between 30 minutes, 45 minutes.
And let's put it like that first. 540 of these tiles of 1 kilometer per 1 kilometer are consumed each year in the European Union. Consumed land take, it means they are transformed from whatever forest, fields, wetlands into transport corridors, construction sites, residential areas, shopping malls, server farms, so whatever. And I mean, just at a global scale, I had a look into a couple of figures. So we're about to reach 8 billion persons on the Earth by the year 2023, so not that far away. And land cover of the Earth is about 150 million square kilometers, which gives you an average density across the globe on the land cover of 52 persons per square kilometer. Fine. But if you look a bit more into it in detail, you will see that just 30% of this land could be called good land, arable land, land fit for settlement purpose, fit for agriculture, fit for forestry. And if you then, it's 1/3 of that, so 44 million square kilometers. And when you then take these 8 billion and mathematically put them on these 44 million square kilometers, you will find 177 people per square kilometer. And I would say that is already a crowd you can easily see even on an surface area of 1 kilometer per 1 kilometer. And here on this slide, we've collected a couple of, let's say, data provided by the European Environmental Agency, why territory matters. So per year, in the previous EU28, it was 540 square kilometers per year taken for settlement purpose, transport, corridors, for whatever. But please see that the overall surface of Malta is 315 square kilometers. And then we've collected a couple of data on the land consumption across the European Union. You can see that within about 20 years, the entire surface of Cyprus and more has been consumed. And it's also clear that it happens in phases, and even in these phases, it matters. The territory as such matters, because you can see that in 2000 to 2006, there was a huge land consumption in coastal regions of the Iberian Peninsula, whereas, for example, in 2012 to 18, land consumption peaked in the United Kingdom and in Turkey, for example. And it's quite easy to quickly understand the dimensions. For example, I've looked up data in Austria. Let's say the real estate prices in the previous 5 years have risen by 50%. And in contrast to that, the net incomes have risen in the same period by 9%. So there you can already see the social dimension of it. Or if you look into it, that for an average building, a new style building, for an calculated economic life cycle of about 25 to 30 years, the construction of the building consumes more energy than heating and cooling of the building over its entire economic lifetime. There you're immediately in questions pertinent to the Green Deal, for example, pertinent to energy consumption. So it really matters what happens on our territory. And then I would like to come to the next slide, Iris, please. And there we see at first it's a map. If you look a bit closer into it, it's countries, and let's say what it shows, it's the share of voters for parties which are somewhat opposed to the European Union, or strongly opposed. And the color going towards purple shows the higher shares in the different countries. And that it's clear that anti-system, anti-EU voting is on the rise across Europe. One of the striking phenomena has been the Brexit as such, as one of the major political earthquakes shaking the European Union lately. And this map is taken from a study which is called Geography of Discontent. And they've looked a bit into what matters in terms of territorial characteristics when one talks about political discontent. And they've looked into a couple of factors, like, for example, rurality / population density, the distance to the capital, wealth, employment rates, age, education, net migration. And from Brexit, as well as American politics, science has taken home that there's a strong belief that the anti-system voters are usually coming from rural districts, lower income strata, low employment levels, rather elderly people. And let's say partly these beliefs are true, even in Europe, partly not. And the study has really looked into it from a solid background. And the study has proven that anti-EU voting really reflects long-term economic trajectories. This is mainly economic decline over long periods. But once policy credibly takes care of it, then really education levels, population density, lack of employment leads to proven rise of anti-EU, anti-system voting. Strangely enough, for example, density works in the reverse sense in Europe, that it's rather the urbanized areas having stronger shares of anti-system, anti-EU voting. And it's just important to see that because, I mean, we're all part of one of the strikingly successful peace projects, the European Union as such, but it shows also there is need to act. And you may question what's the meaning, the wealth of such studies, but it's quite clear that according to the results of this study, it might be very interesting for all mainstream parties, for all centralist parties, to increase their efforts exactly in such areas in order to, let's say, lower again or to build trust towards the European Union again in the people. And with that, I would like to hand over to Philip.
Thanks a lot, Bernhard, for painting the, you can say, the thematic framework for today and for highlighting that territory matters. And when we discussed also with our speakers of today, the event, it became quite clear that if we talk about territorial cohesion, that we need actually two things, and that's exactly a combination between sectoral and territorial solutions, impact. So that's why we are so keen on bringing territoriality into Interreg, bringing it back, highlighting it. And as Bernhard mentioned, this is something we are working already for 1 year. And as you can see on the next slide, that we actually kicked it off with the first visioning event on 19th of November, but actually that was already 2019 with a visioning event, which was talking about how, in view of the upcoming programming period and the vision we have for our respective program areas, how do we turn this actually into an intervention, into a program document? This was a very, I can say, kickoff idea. But then the next step was actually an event which was supposed to happen tomorrow, 1 year ago. So in fact, we could have a little birthday party and say, happy birthday, Leuven, because we had originally planned on the 17th of March to meet you all in Leuven to kick off our series of services, and I wouldn't like to say events, but kick off services on bringing territoriality into Interreg, to come together and to inform each other, discuss, exchange on the notion of territoriality in functional areas. Of course, then COVID hit and we adapted our services. So we had the first online event actually on 22nd of April, which was on territoriality and functional areas. And then we moved, always under the headline of bringing territoriality into Interreg, we moved to policy objective 5. As this was exactly the policy objective where you can say the territory is key factor of it. So we arranged a general introduction to policy objective 5 together with our colleagues from DG Regio on what this whole policy 5 objective is all about, and had an intensive question and answer session with all of you, which then also resulted in a publication which you can find on our website. And the next step was then another event on the 26th of November 2020, which we consider to be a follow-up of the first event on policy objective 5 to make it happen, where we thought we could actually go already a step further into really the implementation steps. However, we realized that there were still a lot of open questions on your side on policy objective 5. So in fact, we a little bit refocused the event, and this was a follow-up with another set of question and answers on policy objective 5. So kind of after tackling policy objective 5, we are today here, and that's the next step in this little graph. We are today here to discuss the Territorial Agenda 2030 and the role Interreg we all can play in its implementation, but at the same time also which role actually the Territorial Agenda can play in our programs. So what is the, in the best case, win-win situation for both? And the idea today is actually twofold. The idea is that on the one hand, we assume not all of you are very familiar with the Territorial Agenda 2030. Many of you might have heard about it. Some of you, as we know all the details. But for many, as we also understood from the registration questions, this is still something you would like to learn. So the first part, the first session today is actually very much about providing you a general overview. What is this Territorial Agenda 2030 all about? And the second step, or the second session then today, would be to shed light on the question of what's actually the link, what's the role of Interreg we all can play in the implementation of the Territorial Agenda, and how the Territorial Agenda can actually help us in shaping and implementing our programs. We are, of course, fully aware that with the event today, which is a little bit more than 3 hours, we will not be able to go into all the latest details and answer all the various questions. Of course, we have already something in mind for a follow-up, which I think is the last little icon here on the graph. We have, of course, ideas already for a follow-up, but today's event is also very much there for you to tell us, especially during the question and answer session, what are your questions, ideas, thoughts, suggestions when it comes to Territorial Agenda 2030 and Interreg. And then at the very end of today, we will tell you a little bit what are our ideas for how to follow up from today. So that's a little bit the history and our, let's say, plan and perspective for today. And with that, we could actually then move already into the first session, which, as you can see on this one, is what I just illustrated you. We will kick off now with a general introduction to the Territorial Agenda 2030. This is my pleasure to lead you through that part. Then I will hand over after a short comfort break to my colleague Bernhard, who will then lead you through the second part, the Interreg and Territorial Agenda 2030. And the third part is then something which is very familiar, I think, to most of you. We will have a substantial amount of time for your question and answers, more about how we do this later. But this will be then your moment to ask the speakers, to share your views, and all of that hopefully leading to ideas and inspiration on how Interreg can benefit and how Interreg can contribute to the Territorial Agenda 2030. Without further ado, let's then move to the first part and let's hear and learn a little bit more on what this Territorial Agenda 2030 is all about. And here I would like to introduce our two keynote speakers who will actually have the challenge to tell us. And the first one we have today with us is Elisa Vilares from Portugal, which of course with the present Council presidency by Portugal is a great pleasure to have you here. But not only because of the Portuguese background. Elisa is the head of division of territorial development and urban policy in the Directorate General for Territory at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Action, Portugal. So you have been, as we know, also very actively involved in the shaping of the Territorial Agenda until its adoption, and last year, and you're very actively involved in its implementation. So who could be better than to give us these general overrepresentation with a certain, maybe also messages from the Portuguese EU presidency on the Territorial Agenda 2030. And after Elisa Vilares, we have with us Jan Edoy, who is a special advisor at the Norwegian Ministry of Local Government and Modernization. And Jan actually, why we have asked Jan to speak to us today, there are two reasons. The one reason is that after the general presentation from the overall perspective, we were interested to also hear a little bit what the Territorial Agenda actually means on the regional, local level. And a very good approach to that is to look at one of the pilot actions. You will hear more about the pilot actions, but you can say pilot actions to implement the Territorial Agenda. And Jan will actually share with us more about one pilot action, which is about small places. And with Jan's background and long-standing working experience on local and regional issues, not least, has he been the director of the Oslo region European office in Brussels, actually from 2015 to 2019. So Jan will then shed a bit of light from the regional and local perspective to the Territorial Agenda. And we very much hope that this will provide you all a very good package of what this Territorial Agenda is all about. With this little introduction, I would like to hand over to you, Elisa, give the floor, or rather the screen, to you. And my colleague Iris will share the slide. So if you just give Iris a hint whenever you would like to skip to the next slide. Elisa, screen is yours.
Thank you very much. And first off, let me express my appreciation for this initiative of Interact, especially to you, Dr. Philip Schwartz. I think this is a very timely initiative to bring us all together here debating the Territorial Agenda 2030. Next slide. So it's up to me to give you a brief note on what the Territorial Agenda is all about and how can it contribute to you and how can you contribute to it. Next slide. Just to give you a brief overall of the context in where the Territorial Agenda comes about. It stems from 20 years of intergovernmental cooperation. First from the European Spatial Development Strategy in 1990, and this is the third version of the Territorial Agenda. I have to say that 27 for me was a very special year. I think for the spatial planning community, but mostly to me because I started in spatial planning in this year, and the Territorial Agenda came about, and also in this year in the Treaty of Lisbon we've got the third pillar of territorial cohesion under the cohesion. And also our own national spatial planning policy program was adopted by Act of Parliament. So it was a very special year, that one. But from then on, we had revisions of the Territorial Agenda in 2011, the Territorial Agenda 2020, and now we have the Territorial Agenda 2030. And why, besides the intergovernmental cooperation, do you ask, is the Territorial Agenda 2030 so relevant today? And I thought I would present this to you in a sort of a Christmas Carol approach, not in terms of ghosts of present, of future, of past and future, but because we are map people with maps. So let me try to explain with maps why the Territorial Agenda 2030 matters so much. So next slide, please. So this is the map of the present, or should I say it's not of the present because it's of 15 October. It has changed. I mean, we know this continually change, this map. But I would like to express what lies beneath it. And for what we know, it is the aggravation of inequalities worldwide. This is what this map represents, and we know the impact on sustainable development goals that this pandemic is causing, and it's causing in particular, of course, in Europe, even though it is a pandemic and it's an overall disease that touches all, it does produce asymmetric impacts and can increase the inequalities between people and places. So this is the present, a present of crisis and of emergency. The next slide, please. But let us not forget of the past, and to me quite a recent past, or should I say connected almost to the map of the present, of the current pandemic, which is the financial and economic crisis that came about the European space and lasted for a year up until this pandemic, and that increased disparities and inequalities. And also, it was a crisis. Let me again refer to this word. Again, it was a crisis. So this is the past from which we come from. And next slide, please. I'm afraid that the future is not so better as well. If we are to keep the pace that we are in 2017, I think you might remember that Portugal and also other countries felt that were devastated by really big forest fires. We are normally with forest fires. We have a Mediterranean climate, but these were massive. And this is the map of the future, meaning this was us in 2017. This will be you or your children or your grandchildren in the future. So this is the severe existential crisis. Again, I refer to the word crisis that we are facing. So I've given you these maps. They are not very joyful, should I say, but let us bring then, this is the why, then what the Territorial Agenda 2030 brings. Next slide, please. So the Territorial Agenda speaks about all of these issues, about peoples and places drifting apart, about climate changes, but also about other topics that were not included here in the map, but could also express these incredible challenges that we are facing, just as the demographic challenges, the digitalization and the industrial revolution, and many others that I see that Bernard mentioned here in the pre-introduction. So the Territorial Agenda, what does it do and what does it bring? Next slide, please. To me, mostly the Territorial Agenda takes, in face of all this context, an optimistic approach, should I say. And I would paraphrase James Baldwin on this, because we can be pessimists because we are alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter, and these are concrete matters. So this is what the Territorial Agenda brings to you in an optimistic approach, that we can that we can bring a brighter future to everyone and to all places. Let me also just briefly mention, because also Bernard mentioned the geography of discontents. What we have seen the rising inequalities, and we have seen and we are seeing them today, but we have also seen this sense of being left behind, of being unheard, of being unaccounted for, of being invisible, of being the losing side. And I go back to the sense of crisis, of emergency that we have seen in the past, in the present, in the future, of anxiety. And it's quite unsustainable, both from the human psyche perspective and for the democratic substrate of our societies, to feel that intensively throughout years and years. And so this is the optimistic approach of the Territorial Agenda against this backdrop, a future for all places. Next slide, please. So it does this by structuring these priorities or this, should I say, coherent narrative about what we need of a just Europe and a green Europe, meaning that it needs to bring justice, it needs to be inclusive to everyone and to all places, and it needs to address the issues at hand in terms of climate change and the risks of big, massive biodiversity loss. Next slide, please. So when it comes to just Europe, these are the main three ideas that stems from the Territorial Agenda 2030. A balanced Europe, meaning that we need to have a balanced territorial development supported by Europe's diversity, where the diversity within Europe is foreseen as an asset. To develop the notion and the implementation of functional regions, where local and regional development converge to create, to reduce the inequalities, and when we can integrate beyond borders in a cross border form of way of living. Next slide, please. In terms of Green Europe, again, I have to mention I do come from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Action, but this is of the most relevance, is an existential relevance, and we need to have this positive narrative, and not a narrative of crisis, but how can we actually transform and transition into this green sustainable Europe, where we have healthy environment for all, where we invest in circular economy, not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of creating strong and sustainable local economies in this globalized world, and the sustainable connections between all of those places. Next slide, please. So essentially what I come here to do is to say, well, the territorial agenda needs everyone. It needs all levels, and it needs the European, the national, the regional, the local levels. It needs this cross-border, this transnational, this inter-regional cooperation. It needs also the neighboring countries of the EU. And it needs also critically the sector policies in what are the impacts they produced in terms of territorial development and asymmetric impact of those policies, but also in what they can bring in cross-sectorial approaches to the development of places. Next slide, please. So what's in it for you, and what's in it for me also, for everyone? I've summed up this to 4 ideas. First, the very relevance of the strategic territorial focus, the spatial lens, and the spatial lens in terms of analytical and territorial evidence provides a strategic framework for which we can combine challenges, capacities, and potentials that are specific to each place. So this spatial lens creates an added value and provides a way to address the complexity of the challenges that each place face. Better governance, quite critical, I'll have to say, and this has been my lesson ever since 2007 of the Territorial Agenda. The first, when I started working in spatial planning, and I saw also our own national spatial planning policy program develop, governance is absolutely key to achieving this. It's absolutely key, and it's the own enactment of the territorial agenda, should I say. So by introducing these territorial approaches, we strengthened the governance structures, and we strengthened its culture, boosting the capacities, particularly at local level, but I should say at local, regional, and national level. We need to enact in order to achieve that capacity. The third thing that's in it for you, I don't know if this is jargon, but I like the expression very much. The breaking silos. It seems like a Lars von Trier Tarantino movie, but it is essentially about this cross-cutting view. This and the fostering of cross-sectorial approaches. Only by this, only by integrating the knowledge and the experience of multiple sector, can we actually achieve sound and sophisticated responses to all those very complex challenges that we face for the future. And this can increase also this combination of multi-level partnership and multi-funding solutions. And last but not least, and I think Jan will mention this better even in practice than me, it's the quest for innovation and experimentation. So essentially we are dealing with complex challenges for all of us. And require new approaches, require a transition and transformation, of course. So they demand innovation and experimentation. They are absolutely needed to address these territorial changes, and we need to find these innovative solutions, test them, and see if they work for all in a learning process for all of us. So next slide, please. So essentially, please also take the Territorial Agenda 2030 as an inspiration. I think this is a shared narrative for us all, the Territorial Agenda 2030. But take inspiration from it and also inspire others with your own actions within this framework of the Territorial Agenda. We have in the website territorialagenda.eu some information about the pilot actions that we now have 6 pilot actions within the Territorial Agenda 2030. They test, again, they test and develop these practices. And we have a process of European sharing of this and trying to capitalize them in the future. And we also have these expiring examples, publication by done by the German presidency, that collects 52 examples on territorial approaches in policy design and delivery. So this is the next slide is the end of it. So thank you very much. Please, if you want more information specific on this, we have the website territorialagenda.eu, and I'm here also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. You mentioned an important thing. You're here with us, so you will be with us the whole day. So if there are later questions coming by the audience, I'm sure you're happy to receive them. But I would maybe at this point like to say thank you very much for leaving Baldwin behind on Baldwin's pessimistic approach and painting us the more optimistic approach. However, I think the message I also got, the optimistic approach requires all of us to take responsibility and overcome silos and work together for a brighter future, so that everyone is needed, every one of us. And I think that leads me immediately to Jan, saying, Jan, so that means we also need you, and we need pilot actions, and we need Interreg in supporting pilot actions. So maybe Jan, by telling us about your pilot action, Small Places Matter, understanding how small places can boost their role for the development of wider territory, by telling us a bit about this pilot action, you can also illustrate maybe the implementation side of the Territorial Agenda 2030. Jan, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Can all of you hear me? No.
Yes.
You can hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Great, great. Thank you very much. My name is Jan. I'm working at the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization in Oslo. And even though we are not on all the maps you show from Europe, we are actually neighbors to Sweden and have a long coastline there. So we have a huge territory, and that's why we are interested in this topic. And let me start by saying that in December, the 1st of December, the ministers dealing with the territorial agenda agreed to start up 6 pilot actions, and Norway agreed to take lead on one of them, the pilot action on small places matter. And why did we do that? Well, in Norway, we have approximately more than 1,000 small places scattered around in the territory. And at the national level, we are now developing strategies and how these small places better can help to boost boost growth in their own territorial areas. So that is one of the reasons we are very interested into this. But let me take you through the slides. So please, the next slide, please. This slide shows that we also are addressing these. Well, this pilot action is one of the 6 that is implementing the overall general Territorial Agenda 2030. So this pilot action is addressing small places matter. This is how to understand how small places can boost their role for the development of the wider territory, as I mentioned, and the basic is that we take on board these concepts that is developed in the agenda, balanced Europe and functional regions. For this pilot action, we have partners from Germany, Poland, Sweden, indicative partners from Finland, Ireland, and Switzerland. And DG Regio, DG Agri, and ESPON is also linked up to this work. So, and it's still open for others to come to join in if interested. Can you, next slide, please? The overall rationale we have on this link to the territorial agenda is first that the pilots focus on the vital role of small towns and villages in the development of integrated territorial development. We are looking at the demographic change in small places and especially focus on the boosting their attractiveness to younger people. And of course, why younger people? Well, that's the future, isn't it? How to boost attractiveness both in the public and private sector throughout the territory. Thirdly, we recognize the potential in areas with specific geographies. In this case, more remote areas. Norway is a very huge territory with sparsely populated areas. So the role of the small villages is very important. And we also want to support a dialogue with the decision makers in the places of all sizes to apply an integrated multi-level governance approach. This means we want, through this pilot action, to develop kind of tools how to organize this dialogue on both on national and regional and local level, and work together to reach the goals. The pilot will also address relevant concern in relation to the quality of life, cross-border activities, Green Europe, and the European Rural Vision, as we also mentioned here. The next slide, please. What activities and empirical evidence and exchange of experience do we foresee? We want to identify existing pilot action areas for relevant activities in the partner countries. Each of the partner countries are, for the time being, working on their own, what should I say, empirical evidence, and will bring it into this pilot. Can't go in detail on that today, but we are also very keen to have a kind of involvement with the citizen dialogue. What works best? That means we want to involve the citizens in these small places, and politicians and citizens, and how to get the best out of this, and to find best practices and experiences on this throughout Europe. We will go into a phase of harvesting and capitalizing from previous and ongoing relevant projects from the cohesion policy, rural policy, and national policy. I would, at this point, I must mention that Norway is not part of the European cohesion policy as such. Norway is participating with their own with our own funds into Interreg programs. So that's our link into the cohesion policy. Norway received no ERDF funding from EU, as you know, but we are raising our own funds and participate in programs. Further, we are looking at we will look at the benchmarking activities and exchange of experience from the projects among the partner countries. We will also follow up with by opportunities to showcase examples, give lessons learned, and network building activities. This will be specified more, of course, later, but that is an aim. Next slide, please. Some of the envisaged results we foresee and want to have is how to integrate this territorial 2030 agenda 2030 approach to the local and regional strategic planning. That's easy to say, but difficult to do. So that we got to have some tools. And we are also looking forward to work out policy actions and recommendations, reports and dissemination of results. And thirdly, to identify practical digital tools and approaches for small places to boost. What kind of digital tools we're talking about here, we have to develop. There might be practical digital tools available out there already, but we want to look into that in a more systematic way. We want to understand how small places can boost their role for the development of the territory, as I've talked about, and we also the partnership will participate and present results in on different European platforms. European Week for Regions and Cities, we are preparing for that now, with the deadline for 26th of March, and we will participate in the ESPON Week, European Green Week, and we also are invited now next week to participate in the European Rural Week. Next slide. How to apply local, regional, and national European policies, how to apply and integrate local, regional, and national European funding instruments. How to better link well, when it comes to this, how to apply and integrate local, regional, national, and European funding instruments, there is a huge range of instruments out there. There are envelopes all over, and we are very much looking forward for looking into how to integrate these envelopes and channel them into this kind of work. But that's also both, well, all kinds of envelopes. How to better link the value in top-down and bottom-up approach, locally oriented initiatives with local, regional, and national and European level policy strategy development. This is something we have to go into. We also want to highlight and emphasize this bottom-up approach in this pilot. Thirdly, how to better use strategic engagement to European and national policy processes and strategies for developing measures that work for specific actions. So this is also an objective for this. Next slide, please. This is the last slide I show you. We have this is about the pilot action as such and the timeline. and the pilot is expected to run for a period of up to 3 years. We have started the kickoff this spring, and we had the first kickoff meeting on the 20th of January, and we had different meetings with the EU presidency, Portuguese presidency, and ESPON. We have the meeting today, and we will continue with meetings in the Rural Week next week, and we are also now, as I mentioned, working on an application for the EWRC, and next month we will have the second partnership meeting on video. It's very difficult to do all this work on video, but that's life for all of us. And we will hopefully participate in the ESPON week in Portugal in June. And then we have the phase 2, the autumn 21, and then phase 3 and phase 4 and and the last phase. I won't go more in detail into what's the bullet points mentioned here now, but these timelines and this schedule and project development will be further developed at the next partnership meeting, and of course the results coming in from all the work that has started around in Europe will of course be uploaded and put into different parts of disseminating results. Hopefully we will also have our own place on this homepage after the meeting in April. This is something we are planning to get to disseminate information on the progress of the project in that homepage also. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for illustrating actually how a pilot action helps implementing the Territorial Agenda 2030 as a little appetizer. Later during this event, you will actually get to know another pilot action. But I feel inspired, Jan, on one of the first slides when you presented the partnership. There was on the bottom somewhere said, and others also, meaning that you're open for others to join in to the pilot action. If I think now from the perspective of our audience today, actually, if I was an Interreg program or an Interreg project, and I feel that my program or my project could actually contribute to your pilot action, A, would I be welcome to join your efforts? B, rephrasing a question or a point which Elisa made, why should I? What's in it for me? Why should I join your pilot action?
Yeah, that's to me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. That's why I say it's open for others, because this is a kind of gathering of best practices and experiences done throughout Europe, and this pilot is open for everybody that wants to join in at any time during the process. And then we will of course have to consider if the contribution is relevant or not relevant or whatever. But initially everybody is welcome to come up with their evidence, so we can consider it in the perspective of the pilot as such. Definitely. And it's also important from a regional, local point of view that, well, Interreg is a territorial program and nothing more and nothing less. And so that means out there are plenty of activities that are addressing the territorial agenda. It's not a question of how the territorial agenda is part of the is part of the Interreg. Interreg is an instrument for implementing the territorial agenda, and that's what we want to prove, and that's what we want to gather. What should I say? Evidence and best practices throughout Europe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Jan. Elisa, if I may come back to you, in preparation of today's event, I came across that your professional educational background is actually architecture, that you have been working as an architect, if I'm not mistaken. So you're familiar with, let's say, constructions. If you think about the implementation architecture, what would you say are, I mean, I guess Interreg is in the core, but there is more. So how do you see this implementation architecture, which are, as Jan said, the different envelopes? Who are the silos which we need to break? Which are these elements contributing to it? So looking at the overall implementation architecture.
Well, thank you very much. As I said in the presentation, it takes everyone from all levels. So it's a very encompassing. The territorial agenda is this strategic framework, but mostly it does require a governance structures in it. I give you the example because I think it's a very clear example at national level what we are doing and what has been the reflection that we have done since 2007. And essentially because we have this National Spatial Planning Policy Program, which is a coherent strategic framework for development of the country. Essentially, what we are trying to do in this second generation is to actually, we have created these intersectorial forums where we articulate with the relevant sectors in order to get them place sensitive, you know, and to actually more than because we had in 2007, for instance, this action plan that was very encompassing for everything that needs to be implemented on our own national spatial planning policy program, and I can see that compared to this European level. But essentially what we are trying to do is to systemically create this intergovernmental and intersectorial and interministerial dialogue in a systematic way, because the implementation of the territorial agenda, for instance, needs to be enacted, more than implemented, enacted by relevant sectorial policies. I say, for instance, rural development and agriculture, but also energy and infrastructure. No, it needs to be enacted by them. And that's how the territorial agenda is implemented, is by their enactment of it, of its principles and of its integration in their own policies. And of course, of the relevance of their own impacts in the territory. So to achieve, to assure that sectorial policies are not place blind, but are place sensitive, and that we have territorial evidence. So this really needs to be a very systemic approach, and the implementation, as I said, happens in multiple levels with multiple actors and with multiple geographies, should I say. And so it does need everyone. And I think what mostly it needs from Interreg is Interreg enacts the territorial agenda consciously. You know, it recognizes the sound, the validity, and the necessity of the territorial agenda as it's presented, and that it can foster these governance structures, this governance culture, and the capacities of public administration in this, but also, and essentially, this innovative approaches, this innovation and this experimentation in an inclusive manner in this governance structural culture. you know. So it's essentially, it's an implementation by enactment of all. This would be my main message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. I think really one point became really clear, and I think this is also kind of, you can say, nicely transition to the second part of today. This is really an issue for all of us, and although maybe Territorial Agenda 2030 might sound very big, even the smallest player plays a role in it, and there is no, you can say, no excuse that I'm so small so I cannot contribute to. So in fact, I think the title of the pilot action Jan was presenting, Small Places Matter, understanding how small places can boost their role for the development of wider territory, we could maybe, in the sense of today's event, rephrase into small actors matter, small programs, small projects matter for the development of the wider territory.